Preptober is in full swing over here, and today we are going to talk about how do you brainstorm and get ideas for your book, and then how do you decide which idea to write or which idea is big enough to make a whole novel or even an entire series. So I'm going to give you some tips here today. I am so excited, so let's get started. Whether you are catching this video during Preptober, where we're getting ready to start a new book for NaNoWriMo in November, or you're just finding this at any month, this video is going to be helpful in brainstorming and figuring out some ideas that might be fun for you to write. And that is really the key, is we want to pick ideas that spark our own imagination, that feel fun. And so often we can get caught up in the idea that it needs to be perfect, or it needs to be the very best idea anyone's ever written, or it has to be completely original. But instead, during this brainstorming process, I want you to really think about, what do I love to read? What types of stories most call to me? What am I most interested in writing? Because 9 times out of 10, the thing that you get passionate about and where your ideas just naturally flow is also going to be the thing that you're really good at writing. If you have no idea where to even start, your brain has just been like, too much pressure, I can't think of any ideas, then one of the best places you can start is with things that you have loved in the past. So Blake Snyder, in his book, Save the Cat, talks about just going out to Blockbuster and renting like 5 or so movies in your genre of choice, and then picking those apart for the elements and the things that you love. That's one of the best ways to learn story structure. Well, we don't really have access to Blockbuster anymore in this day and age, but you do have access to Amazon and Apple Books and Google Books. You have access potentially to a local bookstore, and you have access to Google, where you can go in and say, what are the top books in this genre? Or you can even just go back to your own love of things that you've read in the past, or heroines that you've loved the most, magic systems that were interesting to you, the best mysteries that you've ever watched or consumed. Think about anime, video games, movies you've loved, TV shows you've loved, and of course, books that you have loved in the past that sparked your imagination. If you want to, you can use my Preptober Planner. So I already have it turned to the brainstorming piece, but I have created this big planner for you. It's 95 pages this year. It's the best one I've ever made for 2023. You can get this totally free, and there are some idea brainstorming pages in there that are brand new. I also have in my resource library that's free for all of my newsletter subscribers, I have a entire workbook that's called How to Brainstorm Ideas. So you can download that and you can get some ideas from that as well. It walks you through some methods that you can do. But one of the best things you can do is really go back to the things that you used to love. Who are the heroines that you have loved most across TV and movies and books? What are the genres that you most love? And a genre is really just a category or a style. So we're talking about, is it a small town romance? Is it a big city, like Sex and the City style, like women's fiction or romance? Is it a mystery with a detective, or a mystery that's more like a domestic thriller? What types of stories have you liked best? When you walk into a bookstore, what's the genre or section that you go to that you love the most? That is one of the best places you can start. I also recommend, if you already have a few ideas that you've been playing around with, you're just not sure which one's the best, to go ahead and either open up a Google Doc or take out a piece of paper and just start writing down everything you know so far that sounds interesting. They could be disconnected pieces, like, oh, I had this idea about a haunted mansion, but I also had this idea over here about a dystopian world. Just get all of that out on the paper, because when it's just taking up residence in our brain and it isn't a solid idea that we've put to words, sometimes it can make it difficult to brainstorm because we just feel like we're going on a hamster wheel in our minds. So just write down those pieces of ideas and get them out on paper before you begin. And like I said, go through these questions here about, like, what are your favorite villains of all times? What types of conflicts do you enjoy? And really think through that. Some of you might be coming to your nano decisions not thinking genre. You may have that already figured out. You might just be thinking, what happens in book 3 of my series and how do I figure that out? So I'm going to hopefully give you tips that will help you, no matter if you're starting from scratch, or if you are just trying to figure out what happens next in your series. So here's my suggestions of how to move forward. Once you've sort of made those lists and done your brain dump of ideas that are already like taking up space in your head, here's what I do next. So first, I want you to take that list, that brain dump list of like all the ideas and bits and pieces that you've been thinking about, or the list of your favorite previous things you've loved or things that have inspired you in the past. And I want you to start to notice or recognize if there are any patterns there. What if everything that you've loved the most is science fiction and you didn't realize it until now? Or what if even across different genres, you always come back to this theme of found family? Once you begin to mine your own desires, the things that you have loved to consume as a reader or a viewer or a fan, you can start to see these patterns across genres, or that it's all in one specific niche, what types of tropes you've liked. And recognizing those patterns can give us some boundaries to work within for our own brainstorming. So I want you to find those patterns and write down the things that you just consistently see coming up over and over again. And we're going to refer back to this later in our brainstorming process. So the next thing is to really take that pattern, those patterns, the things that you've loved before, and give yourself a few boundaries. So when we just have every idea is on the table, sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming because we're going to have some ideas that are science fiction and some that are contemporary and some that are set in the past and some that are set in the future. And it can just feel really overwhelming because how do we sort between those? So instead, I want you to take those lists that you created, the ideas that you've done before, and I want you to really start to find those boundaries for yourself and make some decisions up front. Before you decide the idea you like best, try to decide the genre that you want to focus on for this next novel. If you've already been publishing and you're already well known for contemporary romance, this could be a really simple step and you can move on to the next piece. But if you've never published anything before and you've sort of dabbled in lots of different genres, I want you to take a look at those patterns, the things you've loved in the past, and pick out what you feel most drawn to right now in terms of genre, setting, time period. So for example, you might say, I'm not sure exactly what I want to write, but I'm really drawn to Jane Austen fan fiction right now. And I would really love to write something that is Jane Austen story-based, but set in the future. Or you might say, I want to write a fantasy novel, but I want it to be set in a similar time to our medieval times. Start to put a little bit of boundaries on your story. Is it young adult? Is it an adult novel? Is it multiple POV? Is it something set in our contemporary time period? Is it something set in a fantasy world? Whatever boundaries you already know exist in the things that you want to write, go ahead and write those down so that we have parameters for our brainstorming. Another parameter that you might set on your brainstorming is, if you're ready, go ahead and think through, what do I want to do with this novel once it's finished? This might be too overwhelming and you might not know the answer, so you can just skip it. But if you already know, like, I really want my NaNoWriMo novel to be the first novel that I self-publish, then you'll want to be thinking of, what are the types of stories I want to be known for as a self-published author? Like, most self-published authors don't write one romance and one sci-fi and one fantasy. That's not really the best practice to getting well-known or making money as an author. You would want all of your books to be in the same genre. So you might be thinking, what do I most want to be known for writing? Not just this book, but thinking long-term in my career. What do I most want to write long-term? Or you might say, you know what, I write romance all the time, but I want to try something different for Nano, and this is going to be just for me, or potentially for a pen name. Or you might be thinking, I've been indie, but I want to submit something to an agent and see if this can be a book that can be submitted to traditional publishing. And whichever your intention is for this novel might also help you decide which idea is the best one for you. So once you've decided your parameters, now I want you to actually do some brainstorming. So once you come to the table and you're ready to start brainstorming, there's a couple of tips I want you to keep in mind as you start this process. So one, even though you have some parameters and some boundaries around your brainstorming, like you know which genre you're going to brainstorm and what you plan to do with this novel next, I want you to otherwise completely open your mind. No idea is too stupid or it's been done before. Like, let go of all of your judgment. There are some ways you can get yourself into a no judgment mindset, like turn on some music and dance around for a little bit, give yourself some quiet affirmations like, no idea is too stupid. Everything is on the table. I'm opening myself up to creativity. It could also be that you just sit and meditate for a few minutes and just completely clear your mind. Or it could be that you go out to a coffee shop and you get yourself into a really good mood and you sit down with a friend and you just state your intention at the beginning and you say, no idea is too laughable or too silly or too out there. Everything is open for discussion within the boundaries of murder mystery stories. Give yourself the boundaries and then open your mind and make it a judgment-free zone. Remember that these are just ideas. You don't have to pursue any of them. But in order to allow yourself to get to the really juicy, creative ideas, you have to allow your mind to be open and you have to get rid of any perfectionist tendencies to make it the best story of all time or the most unique story. Instead, just let every idea flow. Every idea is possible, and then you'll sort through them later. I also want you to make sure that you have some kind of method for taking notes of everything that happens during your brainstorming session. You do not want to end up in a situation where you've just blurted out a bunch of ideas and then later you're like, what were those ideas? Like, then your time is wasted because we can't always remember everything that came out of our mouths or that happened during brainstorming. So make sure you have a notebook to record it, or you have an actual recorder on your phone that's open. No matter where you capture it, make sure you have a way to capture those ideas so you do not lose them. Sometimes you can also sort of prime yourself and get ready for the brainstorming session and get ideas flowing ahead of time by actually going and spending some time immersing yourself in that style and tone. So you could play a video game that's in that genre, or you could watch a movie in that genre, watch a TV series that's on your list of the things you loved most, or read a few chapters of your favorite scenes from the book. You could also go to some place like Goodreads, for example, and search top 100 lists of books in your genre and just read the descriptions and the summaries, and it will give you maybe some ideas. You could also even open up news headlines and see what's been going on in the world lately, because maybe some of that could inspire some of your book as well. So pull inspiration from lots of places, then open your mind and get ready to brainstorm. Let's take a minute to just look at some of the idea brainstorming pages that are in your Preptober planner if you have downloaded that. So you've got some questions here like, what genres do you love most often to read and watch? List 3 to 5 movies or series or anime or books you've loved and what elements you loved most about them. List of your favorite main characters of all time, favorite villains or story conflicts, settings. So this can be another thing that can help you with your brainstorming. Is there a certain time period, a place, a world building type thing, magic system that has ignited your imagination that you thought, I want to do something like that? What is the main POV character in your story? Like, can you imagine things about your detective or your teenager that's going to be in high school, or this couple that's going to fall in love? What's the tone of the story? Is it going to be humorous? Is it really serious? Is it dark and brooding? Is it mysterious? What is the tone of this? And then what side characters can you imagine? And then what's the central conflict of the story? You may not know this yet, but if you can brainstorm some of that stuff, it might help you. But there's lots of sort of brainstorming things here that you can use to help you in this process. But once you want to follow through with my brainstorming method, you can either do this inside a Google Doc or something like digital, or you can just grab a plain old piece of paper and you can do this. I also like to set a timer, just because if I give myself 2 hours to just sit and do it, I'm going to get distracted. I'm going to just kind of look through things online and I'm just not going to get a focused set of ideas. But when I set a timer for, say, 10 minutes on my phone, I tend to just focus my brain in and I can just bullet ideas out and I don't overthink them. You know yourself better than anyone. Are you going to overthink, or is the timer going to make you panic? And just do whatever feels best to you. There's no right or wrong way to brainstorm. If you have multiple genres that you've determined you like one of them might be, I'm thinking of writing a YA dystopian story similar to like Hunger Games. You would fill one paper out with YA dystopian, and then you might have another one where you're thinking, I just want to tell kind of like a YA witchy story. So that's a second one. And then the third one might be, or I kind of also love domestic thrillers. So these are very different genres So your ideas are going to be very different. But if you're just not sure which genre yet, then make a sheet of paper and set a timer for each one of them. I'm just going to turn to the YA witchy stories because that's typically what I tend to write. So let's say I knew I was going to write YA witchy. If you already know that you're writing a type of series, you don't just need a boundary of the genre. Your boundary is, I'm looking for book 12 of my series, and I'm just trying to come up with the theme of this particular story. So write out whatever is the best parameters for your particular situation. Set a timer. I like to set a timer for just a short period of time, like 10 or 15 minutes, and then no distractions. Just allow yourself to write out as many ideas as possible. And sometimes I will even go ahead and make some little marks so that it sets my brain up for, okay, I have all these slots to fill out. So timer starts, you start writing down your ideas. So it doesn't have to be detailed plots or anything like that. It can just literally be the first thing that comes to mind. Like, what about a girl who solves mysteries with magic? Or it could be an idea of, what if it was Pretty Little Liars with witches? Or what if it was a witch academy story? And you just kind of start in this idea of asking yourself, what if? And don't judge the ideas, just literally like anything that comes out, even if it's like stupid. What if it's a witch with a magic pickle? Like, who cares? It can be the dumbest idea ever. And then you can just scratch through it and be like, well, that was stupid. But you want to tell your brain, I'm just trying to come up with any and everything. And it can be based on other stories like Pretty Little Liars. It could be based on your previous things that you've written or previous things that you've loved, but just let your mind go until the timer comes off. And hopefully by then you have at least a few ideas on the page. Once the timer has gone off or your time period for working on this has ended, I want you to go through and take your highlighter or marker or something, and I want you to circle the idea that you liked the best out of this set of ideas. Maybe there's a couple that you really loved. Look and listen for your own intuition. Were there any stories that gave you goosebumps, that made you laugh, that already made you feel something emotional in your gut that you were like, oh, that I could see that being a really good story? Or, wow, I really would love to tell a story about a wounded veteran who finds love. Like, these are the stories that I love most. Circle it. Then I want you to repeat the process, because the first set of ideas are really going to be the things that have already been sort of top of mind, or things you've seen other people do, or they're based on previous things. But if you really want to give your brain access to those deeper stories, the things that maybe aren't as common or overdone, or the things that just haven't, like, you want to press yourself to really dig into your most creative ideas, you want to continue to get more than just this surface of ideas. So set the timer again, or give yourself another period of time if the timer doesn't work for you, and just start thinking of more. So the next round, you might come up with, several more ideas. I'm not going to give you examples because it would take me forever. Then you circle it again. Say, okay, well, this was the second idea I liked. You go through the process again until you feel like you have exhausted all the ideas that you can think of, and the timer runs and you're just like, I can't think of anything else that could potentially happen. You can, in between sessions, do like I had mentioned, like where you go and you play a video game, or you watch something that you previously used to love in that genre, or you read through lists of books and descriptions on Goodreads, and then you get more ideas, and then you come back and you bounce off those ideas until you feel like you've kind of exhausted yourself. Then I want you to take a little bit of a break from it, maybe a day or an hour, and then come back to your list, and I want you to look back through the ones that you circled or highlighted. For some of you, there may just be one, and now you know that's the story that you most want to write for Nano, and you're done. For some of you, there might be 50 ideas that are highlighted. So then you can go through with another color, and now that you have a better sort of grip on which ones have been kind of on your mind for the last hour, or things that have sparked your imagination, maybe you could think of a combination of these two items, and that becomes another item now that your brain's had some time to think through it. But I want you to go through your list, and I want you to start eliminating things, because eventually we need to come up with an idea. Like, eventually we have to make a decision. So go through this, and then I want you to pick out your top 3 ideas, max, 3 max. If you get stuck on 5 or 6, then bring it to the group. So Heart Breathing's writing community, or do a poll in your own reader group, or go to your author friends and see which ideas they think are the most marketable, or go back and think about your intentions for this book and say, okay, which book idea do I think is most likely to get an agent's attention? And just pick your top 3 max ideas and let's move forward with those. So once you have those top ideas, the next thing that I like to do is take out, let's say I had 2 that I really loved most. I would get these bigger note cards. You can also do this just on another plain sheet of paper or in a Google Doc or anything like that. And I would write those ideas at the top of the page. So for example, let's say Pretty Little Liars with Witches. Can't type. I can't write when I'm also talking. So Pretty Little Liars with Witches. And let's say I combined these ideas in an academy. So it's a witch academy story and it's got a Pretty Little Liars vibe. And then let's say we had magic in a contemporary high school. And it's going to be a mystery. And maybe that's all we know. Like, it's just a very loose ideas. Sometimes I will color code these just because I love to use markers. So I'll say this idea is my blue idea. This idea is my pink idea. And then I'm going to do what I did again on the other one. You can do this just with bullet points on your page if you're using a Google Doc. But there's something about just giving yourself the space and the bullet points that I think makes your mind say, okay, I'm going to fill in these slots. This is going to be cool. And I want you to take each idea separately. And again, with a timer or a period of time that you're going to give yourself, I want you to start brainstorming through some things like conflict and setting. What's the time period this is set in? Can I imagine anything about this story world? Who are the main characters in this story? What's the conflict of this story? And just start expanding on this idea. But I don't want this to be like, we haven't chosen our idea yet. So you don't want to spend like weeks and weeks on it. We're talking about just 10 minutes and saying, is there anything I can just really quickly rattle off about Pretty Little Liars with Witches in an academy? So you set your timer and you fill in as many of these little bullet points as you can. So you might say, okay, we have a main character with raven hair who can shift into a crow. Obviously, I would probably write it better than that because I would have more time, but I'm trying to make this fast. So we know this about our main character. Let's say it's set in a like a Gothic castle in the mountains. And it's a world where witches are forbidden. And just think of anything about the world, the weather, the setting, the tone, the characters. I can imagine that one student has gone missing and there's spooky sounds in the hallway. And you just rattle off as many ideas about the setting, the tone, the characters, the dialogue, anything you can think of. If you're a visual person, start closing your eyes and imagine, what can I see about this world? Does it immediately come up where I can see some of the town or the castle or the setting, the weather? Is there anything that comes to mind? Then, you could do the next idea tomorrow, or you could just take a little bit of a break to give your space between the two and then come back to the second idea. And you can do this for as many ideas as you have, but this is part of why I say pick a max of 3, because if you had 50 ideas and you were doing this for each one, it's going to take you hours and hours, and it might kind of get to a point where your ideas farther down the line don't even really get any of your energy because you're exhausting yourself. So then we say, what about magic in a contemporary high school, and what would that mystery look like? Okay, so you set the timer and you start brainstorming this one. But let's say immediately you're like, this world is not as rich to me, and I can't really think as much about what might be happening in this contemporary high school. But let's say it's an orphan girl who just moved to town. And then just say she's living with her grandmother. Let's say we can see her best friend that she meets on day 1 is a little bit of a mysterious, quirky girl. And then you can think of a few more ideas as the timer goes. just filling through the process, going through the process of allowing yourself 10 minutes to think about this one story and writing down anything that you can think of about the tone or the genre of the world, the stakes, the conflict, anything like that, will already start to give you an idea of which story is going to flow better, because one of them will seem more rich, will seem more automatic to your brain. The ideas will start to flow. If you're lucky enough that you have multiple that begin to flow, then you just pick the one that you think sounds most interesting or most marketable or that you just like the best. And now you have multiple ideas that you could go with and you can't go wrong. But if there's one that you're like, okay, this fantasy witches in this haunted castle, that really got my imagination going. This is the story that I'm going to write. But now that you've chosen which story you like best, how do you know if there's enough here to make it into a full novel? Well, for me, when I'm thinking about whether something's big enough to be a book, it's really coming down to genre and conflict. So like I said, the genre is just the category or style of the book. So think about, or even just Google, let's say the genre here is going to be fantasy, like YA fantasy with witches. I could Google this, YA fantasy with witches, elements of YA fantasies with witches. Or if you were writing a small town contemporary romance, you could Google elements of small town contemporary romance novels. And you're going to find blogs and videos and lists of the typical things that you find in that kind of story. Or if you are pulling off of things that you've loved in the past, you would already have a knowledge of what types of things you would expect in a story that is a witchy academy, right? Because you've read multiple of them, you kind of know what typically happens in these types of stories. So you can compare those types of stories and what you know about them, or that list of elements, to the list that you've just made. Do you have some of the fundamental elements that are already coming to mind that would make up a story like this? Is there a big enough conflict to justify this story? Are the stakes high enough? Because if we're just a Pretty Little Liars in a magical academy, but there's no murder mystery and there's no mystery and it's just girls like hanging out in an academy, that's not really enough for a story. It doesn't mean we can't build on it though. What we need, if we have a story that's not big enough, is we need more conflict. So we can say, well, okay, let me throw in one of the girls has disappeared and everyone is blaming this one dorm room. Let's say they stay 4 to a dorm room and one of the 4 girls has gone missing and they all blame, girl A in the room. Then now we've got conflict because maybe her roommates are afraid of her. Maybe everyone thinks that she's keeping something from them. And maybe there's these spooky ghosts. Now we have a conflict that can carry us through the entire story because we've got this missing girl and we know we're trying to figure out what really happened to her. So think about the elements of your genre and figure out, do you have the same type of conflict or similar type of conflict and things at stake in your story as you would typically find in this type of genre. And if it matches those elements, then you know your story is big enough. Same thing when it comes to a series. Like if you are telling a story about witches in an academy, do you have enough there with the relationships and the things going on in this academy that you could tell an entire series about it? The first book could be about this first missing student, but then the second book could be about a new mystery that was brought to light in the first one, where in her investigation, she found a mysterious library downstairs. And now the second book is about the truth of this story she found in the library. So can you continue to expand on this, or is this just a very narrow short story kind of idea? And it really comes down to the conflict and the characters and what's typical of this genre. Another thing that you can do when you're starting this brainstorming thing, and you say, okay, I'm pretty sure this is the idea that I'm going to go with, is you can come here to your Preptober planner. And here I have like a basic outline of a novel, like the title, the basic premise, which you would write here, Pretty Little Liars in a Witchy Academy or whatever. Main conflict is one student has disappeared and they're blaming the main character. And then the resolution is that they find out at the end that the girl was being kidnapped by one of the teachers, or whatever. Here on this page, you have a spot to list up to 10 possible or potential scenes. And so the next stage of your brainstorming can actually be taking that premise that you just came up with, and then can I imagine 10 different scenes that would be typical in a book like this? So maybe the first scene is your character arriving to this magical academy. The second scene is her meeting her new roommates and there's something off about some of the other girls. The third scene is they've discovered that one of the roommates has been murdered or is missing and some of her blood was discovered on your main character's cloak. Might be their first day in magic class. You know, can you think of these scenes? And of course, your genre may be totally different from this, but you kind of already have an idea of the typical scenes that appear in your genre. So can you map that to your own story? If you can't, then your idea might need more time or more fleshing out. You might need more tools like my how to write and plan a series or my how to plot your novel stuff, or wait until we get into the world building video next, which is going to help you flesh some of this out too. If the ideas are coming fast and furious and you're getting more and more excited about it, then you know that you have landed upon your perfect idea for NaNoWriMo. Congratulations. Okay, so hopefully by now you have some really good ideas or at least some really good tools that you can pull from. Again, remember that just because I mention it doesn't mean that you need to do it this way. So really, you know yourself better than anyone. So you know whether a timer is going to make you feel more pressure or it's going to work for you. So just take the pieces that work for you and let go of the rest, and feel free to adapt and be flexible in any piece of this process. If you are ready, go ahead and choose that one idea and then come back on Sunday where we will be talking about world building, setting, and description. And then later in the month, we're going to talk about your story outline, dialogue, pacing, and lots of other great stuff that's going to help you be ready for November and writing your next great novel. So I will see you in my next video. Make sure that you follow that link down below and go get my Preptober Planner and all my other great resources for free. Also, you'll find a link down below for our Heart Breathings writing community where we'll be running writing sprints all day on Saturday coming up for our double down day event. And there'll be live streaming sprints. This is a great time to follow through with your brainstorming and start to fill out your Preptober planner. So you can find all of that on the Google Calendar at the link down below. And make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss any notifications during this Preptober period. It's going to be really fun. And I hope this has been helpful. I will see you in my next video. Bye.